On today's World Inside, United Nations led efforts to put Sustainable Development Goals back on track with a little help from China. Details on pursuing SDGs from Amina Mohammed, the UN Deputy Secretary General.
Hello and welcome to World Inside with me, Tian. With 6 years to go to 2030, unpredictable global shocks have weighed down on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, now worryingly way behind target. What will it take to press ahead with the agenda to get the SDGs back on track? As the UN report shows, financing, the lack of it, is the crux of the problem. And how could the technology gap among the countries to be fixed? And how could leaders learn and get inspired with the world's success stories? All of those are key points to be discussed in the year's Summit of the Future, convened by the United Nations in September. Recently, I had an exclusive interview with UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed. SDGs have to start with the heavy topics.
Yeah.
That's part of your job. Yet we are seeing schedules being delayed, cooperation might be questioned, influenced by different factors. What do you make of the current pace?
What is clear is that we've not been able to recover from some of the crises that we've had, nor have we had the opportunity of resources to come in at the scale and at the length of time that is needed for us to achieve the SDGs. And a lot of this has to do with international cooperation, where we see geopolitical tensions coming to bear on the dilemma of finding resources for developing countries. So what we have done, which I think is important, is to say we have 6 years to go for the SDGs. What can we do? How can we clarify what needs to be done, both in terms of the finances, in terms of the challenging environment of debt, of fiscal space that more is needed, of access to markets, which obviously is constrained by many developing countries, and what specifically are we talking about in terms of investment, and how does that play out in the lives of young people, in women, and in getting better equality and partnerships around the world.
I know you have been trying to create vehicles and platforms
Yes.
for the funding mechanism to work, particularly for the least developed economies. So how does that work, especially when countries' economies are struggling apparently with their priorities?
Well, there are very many different aspects to this, but the Secretary General put together a couple of years ago what he called the SDG stimulus. So to speak to finance ministers, to economists, to people who will help to leverage the markets, what we needed: more fiscal space, deal with the debt, and then look at the institutions of finance that we have, how to make them work better. The Asian Development Bank, the World Development Bank, the African Development Bank. We push for that. Now we have about 10 leaders who come together with us, some from the developed countries developing, to see how we can get more SDRs. These special drawing rights can help us to leverage if they go to multilateral development banks. That's happened recently, and we've seen Japan contribute to that. But then we also have small island developing states in the Pacific, in the Caribbean, where we need to have better financing for countries that are vulnerable to climate change. And here we have the Bridgetown Initiative, which was curated by the Prime Minister of Barbados, and that's another additional instrument to help us to build the momentum. We had President Macron, who comes with the 4 Ps, which talk about people and planet and prosperity, to get the money in. But we also had an initiative that looks at national development banks, because we know that domestic resources are helpful. So all these help to bring the case to the G20.
Yes.
When we want to discuss about debt, or we want to discuss about tax, international tax or wealth tax. So we keep the discussion going on how to find the means of implementation for developing countries who are least likely to achieve the SDGs in time.
The other bank, quote unquote, you created is the UN Technology Bank.
Oh yes.
That is helping the developing countries at large to catch up with the pace of technologies, and also to create a good platform for different development stages of economies to work together.
Yes.
Technology can be, in some eyes, a sensitive issue, competition issue, rivalry issue, but in others' eyes, a rallying issue. How do you see the different sides of technology and from UN's perspective, bring everybody on board?
Clearly, we are not ready for the event of AI. And so what the UN is doing in the Summit of the Future is to bring AI and the Global Digital Compact under the auspices of the UN on the issues of governance, on the issues of knowledge and capacity building. And we hope that member states will agree that, and we do know that many of our bigger member states support that the UN should be holding those positions for governance. And that's a challenge because on the one hand, AI is going to leapfrog education and connectivity. It's going to be a totally different classroom than the one that you and I went to school in. But also
we can go back to school.
We can go back to school. It's lifelong learning.
Indeed.
But it's also for food systems and how you can be better prepared for production through the whole value chain until you get to market, so e-commerce, financial services. So there are many things that will come as a result of positivity for AI, but we have to have the governance in place for it.
The UN has created a beautiful platform bringing expertise from all over the world to discuss AI governance, even though there's no yet a united convention coming out at the moment, but you are making tremendous efforts on that. Tell us, what are some of the latest updates and challenges and opportunities in these discussions?
Well, one of the best panels that the Secretary General has brought together has been the one experts on AI. And from this country, China, we have 2 experts there. And there's been very lively discussions because the constituencies have come from the public sector, academia, science, civil society. Everything has come to bear, and their report will be out in the next couple of months. That's going to be helpful because we are discussing the Global Digital Compact on governance. So I think a lot of the issues that have been coming from this have been can we have the same panel that will give us the latest in terms of technology, but not just that, the science, the empirical data for it. As we have the IPCC for climate, can we have one for AI? I think this is very important. The second is somewhere along the line, we have to be meeting on standards and measures to help us understand it better. Can we put that in a forum that we can meet annually? Can we put a fund together so that we can build capacities of member states that don't have it, so they can determine how to use technology and have it not imposed upon them as the way to go. And I think these discussions, can we leverage the existing capacities we have with the International Telecom Union, ITU, and UNESCO, together with another office perhaps that will strengthen, as you said, can we have the literacy? Where is the go-to place that opens up this huge arena for AI that you can find a way to navigate it? It's very complex. So I think we have some building blocks there. Many issues have been brought up about AI and algorithms, the harm that it does, but also the good that it does.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's something that as we go to the Summit of the Future and member states agree on a framing, what we will see is that the day after, how we implement and we bring the world closer together with AI, and maybe this is a bridging to the fragmentation.
Who knows?
Who knows where it's coming from? But we need it, and I see more opportunities and chances for developing countries if we get it right. But it has very big risks of leaving people behind, of creating further inequalities. But we need to imagine the world.
Indeed.
There is the AI of governance, there's the AI of the technology it brings for you and I to be better off. But I don't think we've had sufficient discussion around how it's going to transform societies.
No, not at all.
And that, for me, is a vacuum that we need to fill very quickly.
You've been repeating an important phrase, the Future Summit.
Yes.
And that is going to take place in coming September at the UN headquarters, involving state leaders and stakeholders from all over the world. How will this summit be able to still enlighten people at a time when people are so tired about all these dramas going on.
I think the value of having a global town hall for our global village must be protected. There isn't a place where you can go to in the world today other than the United Nations where everyone has a voice. You might not like to hear some of the voices. They are equal, but they're not of all the same strength. But it is important that that space provides an opportunity for solutions to major crises or smaller crises that cannot be done by any one nation. It requires maybe small states to be the bridge, bigger states to take the decision because they have the powers, economic or otherwise. We have to rebirth the United Nations. It was born in 1945, coming out of the tragedy of World War II, and promising never to go back to those dark days. And sadly, we are back in, maybe not as dark, but certainly they're not very bright for many people. The war in Ukraine, what is happening in Gaza today, in Palestine, in Sudan, in Myanmar. There are many, many places of conflict that today we should not be seeing. And it is because we have an inability to solve the problems in the current structures that we have. And so what the Secretary General had taken after 75 years is proposals to member states to think this through again. And what we have today is a few pages that member states are looking at to create more inspiration, because that's what we need, to rebirth hope, because without hope, then the world becomes very much more fragmented, and they go off into their different spaces where they will never solve many of the issues that we have today. So come to the Summit of the Future. It will be about young people and future generations. It will be about a new agenda for peace. It'll be about how we handle new technology and in particular AI, but it will also be about the finance architecture of the world, how to become more equal in terms of access to resources to help develop your people, your society, your countries, to better partner, better trade, better coexist.
Madam Deputy Secretary General, sitting where you are, how would you manage to get communication flow smoothly, but at the same time with principles?
In the job that I am now, I have the Charter. And the Charter promotes peace, it promotes human rights, it promotes justice, solidarity, dignity of life. And I think that that's a very good principle to have. But it must connect with people. It must connect on the planet that we have. And so when I visit places, I want to be able to be in the audience before I give an answer, because I need to connect with my audience. I want them to leave the room not thinking, oh, that was a very nice speech, but what were they going to do with my speech? Is there anything there that inspired them to act differently than when they came in the room to make more impact? I visited the docks, the ports, a fishing, state-owned fishing company that went from fishing to manufacturing. And I think
that transformation.
That huge transformation, it's always good to see how it's done, the scale at which it's done, and then to ask what is the partnership that China can bring to other countries around the world in terms of those investments, building capacities, so that people are better able to trade. There's a more level playing field. And I think I learned a lot there from where perhaps the trawlers, the boats were first procured from Japan. And by the time you had a third iteration, they were manufactured in China. So there's progress. Yeah. I looked at some of the practices for sustainable fishing that were not there a decade or so ago. But they are there now. It's a state-owned enterprise, so it means that standards are higher in terms of how you are going to achieve that. Now, there's probably still a way to go, but at least you can see progress and you can hold people to account. Now, that experience of what I saw, even in how you can fish from the time it's taken out of the water and it's put through krill and it goes into a little can, I saw all of that, you know. So I remember, because there's nothing that helps you communicate better than your memories. And I can take these examples into a conversation where sometimes it can only be about language. You know, it's about crossing a T, dotting an I, perfect English or Chinese or French, but it doesn't connect. These times that I take out to experience help me to have a better conversation and maybe to bring people together, because it's very hard today to do that.
how do you see China has been working with the UN on many of the fronts that you have been illustrating? China is unique, but also China is one of the five P5s of the United Nations, and now the world is changing. So how does that role present to you the potential of cooperation between the UN and China?
In many spheres. I mean, clearly there is a peace and security part of this conversation, and that member states will have to engage and find a better way of structuring inclusion and voice and a response that allows a world that is more peaceful. That's a big challenge for the P5, and hopefully the 10 members that are additional to that can help them to come to that decision. But there are other spaces, the development space, where we are seeing many initiatives of China that can support the SDGs. And I think this is where even my experience this morning is just one part of it. But none of that can happen without us taking cognizance of financing and the climate agenda. And the climate agenda is really important because it's existential. The threat is existential. If we don't have the 1.5 degree world, we will be much worse off. The populations will suffer. We are seeing 50-degree temperatures today. At the same time, we have to reconcile how do we grow, but how do we survive? And I think that conversation with China is going to be important in the G20. It's going to be important in COP29 and COP30, where we really discuss the measures that have to be taken. China's leadership in the G20, it has it on finance, it has it on climate, it has it on tax, it has it on, I would say, some of the financing mechanisms that we need to look at, and that's going to be important. And so in the UN, you know, this year we will see the G20 come to the GA. That voice that promotes the well-being and more equality for developing countries in the global south. Right. China's been very good at the South-South cooperation and illustrating what is possible, but there's so much still that is a challenge, and yet China finds itself in the position of top leaders. So balancing, you know, the interests of developing countries and its leadership there, it must continue to defend the global south and those interests.
Well, the world has been changing. Many of the mechanisms you are working on, for example, earlier as very efficient tools, now it takes more patience.
Yes.
Yeah. How do you see that in that process, the UN and China can better cooperate to make that transition more smoothly, and also particularly to work with the developing countries, the so-called global south, if we give abbreviation, bring them onto the same page?
Well, we have many mechanisms. The SDGs are one, the climate agenda is another, the financing for development that will happen next year is another. Yeah. So I think continuing to support those. The other is that there will be many reforms to put a better footprint of the United Nations in each country. We have about 130 countries where we have a resident coordinator system with UN country teams that promotes the SDGs, and I think here the support of China to make sure that that is effective will be considerable. If we are speaking to instruments that one can use, there are many initiatives. What is the UN best at? Convening. I believe in a few weeks' time on FOCAC, which is about the African region coming here. And that African voice is going to be important to the partnerships that China has. The same will happen for other areas. We just came out of SIDS 4. Which China was also at for small island developing states. There'll be another one on landlocked countries that will happen in southern Africa. So convenings are important on issues in specific areas of the world that need some visibility and attention. And the more of that happens, I think the better people understand how the connected world we live in is better together than apart.
Madam Deputy Secretary General, according to some of the latest reports we gather from all over the world, the green transformation process has been slowed down over the past few years. And now you also see a series of even trade disputes regarding EVs, batteries, and the list goes on. So how do you see the big agenda, common consensus, but the road to get there already become ever blurred? it seems?
I don't think it's so much blurred. It's a fact of life that there will be security, economy, politics, and power. And these transitions in our geopolitics can sometimes be of concern to different parties. It depends which party on the day of the transition, right? Which way it's going. I think what we have to do is to use these instruments that we have, be faithful to them, but at the same time reconcile the concerns people have and try to overcome them with dialogue. The idea that we just we throw out, as they say, the baby with the bathwater, it's not reasonable, because people will suffer. There are contradictions here. On the one hand, we want green transitions or blue transitions, and this will require solar, it will require wind, it will require other energy transitions, transitions in industry and transitions in food systems. You have to have an enabling environment for that. And so when you find one country is producing the means to that, and then barriers are apparently going up, you need to find a way to reconcile it so that you don't prevent many countries from progressing with the transitions. We don't have sufficient scale-up of cheaper materials for these green transitions. We don't have the financing, but if we have indications of it, then we should embrace it. If there are concerns, then we should consult and dialogue about it so that we can get through it. But this is the reality of the world today, is that, you know, sometimes these concerns are not addressed within the frameworks that we have, within the instruments, the WTO. I mean, all of these are areas that you can come to have these discussions. We seem to abandon them and go off into different corners. That's not helpful. That's why multilateralism, you know, was framed in such a way that we could all we could find the solutions to complex issues. But never to forget, a lot of this is about power. A lot of this is about politics. So we have to find the political will to want to have a better world. And we did sign on to that. We signed on to the SDGs, so make them work. But implementation is not, it's not easy.
It's not automatic.
It's not automatic, and it's about partnerships. And I think that this is what we're seeing. The world is growing, and as it grows, people become more assertive of their powers, of their ability to excise what their countries want for their people. Things are tested, democracies are tested, many things are tested, but I think if we can, you know, keep in place checks and balances that allow us not to go too far out of the track.
About women leadership, Madam Deputy Secretary General, now how can we maintain and even further nurture an ecosystem in which gender parity, women leadership can become and remain the priorities and integrate into other things to achieve better results for all of us?
Well, you know, we've had a lot of success. We're getting more women into decision-making roles, but getting them there doesn't necessarily mean that we've achieved the end result of having the impact felt of all the goals that we have asked for. Getting there means it's the beginning of another battle, because you invariably, as a woman, you're still dealing with a patriarchal society on the other side. The example of, we have 50% of our women in management positions in the UN today.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. That is, you know, the Secretary General decided, with what I can do, let's do it, and he did it. But he's also been able to put in, of our presence on the ground, 50% of our leaders on the ground in countries are women. But when you get there, you may be in a country where the society itself does not even respect the role of a woman in that seat. So it's dismissive when you come to meet them, dismissive when you come to try to frame a discussion around the SDGs. And so I think the battle is not finished. It begins there. We, as we open up the space for women's leadership, have to bring in more women to the table. We have to deliver. And that's sometimes harder than when men sit at the table and have to deliver. And we have to make sure that we are working with them in the same way that we believe our participation is useful, is their participation useful, and come together with that. But for women's leadership, occupy the space, create more for others to come in. We need to be at the table of peace. We are not. We need to be at the table sustainable development. We are getting better at it, but we're still not there yet. We need to be at the table where technology, as it is designed, as algorithms are designed, all of these, we need to be at the table.
Yes.
So that they don't affect us.
Yes.
And I think that this is going to be a continuous exercise in trying to make that happen. The UN will convene those spaces. We have parity even in the high-level panel I talked to you about on AI. The co-chair is an incredible woman from Spain. She's the minister there for technology and has moved it for us. So I'm excited about the potentials and opportunities. Young people are doing it better. We're seeing more young women in those spaces, but we as the generation behind them, I stood on the shoulders of some women, and I hope that others will stand on our shoulders. But we need to do more faster. When you come to the decision making for the permanent 5 members of the Security Council, the leadership is all men. When you come to decision making on climate change, on finance, in that room, it is predominantly men. And so I think that, for that to change, it requires us to think about the structures of governance and how you get there in the first place. If it's elected into office, we have to say more to the women. Can you also get behind electing women into office? And if they're not electing, can they get out there and use their vote? We are 50% of the population. But in other governance issues, we have to push. The Secretary General for the United Nations will be elected in the coming 2-3 years, right? So for the first time in history, as we did with the IMF, can we not see a woman in that position? And can we find the spaces to promote that?
Beautifully said. China is now promoting the high-quality development.
Yes.
It is also trying to deepen its reform. Your team here in China also work with China on a daily basis, and you are guiding them. How do you see your future cooperation with China, very briefly?
I think it's on a positive trajectory. As I said, China is reaching out to many more countries than it has had before. The partnerships and the convenings that they do are so much better. The initiatives that they have are consolidating around the SDGs, and this is what is important. Anything that lifts the acceleration of the SDGs for us is positive, and I believe that's the relationship that we have here, is promoting the Sustainable Development Goals.
What a pleasure. As always, Madam Deputy Secretary General, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
And that's my exclusive interview with Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, about the upcoming Summit of the Future by the United Nations. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of my team. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.